updated will help to set that good foundation here for the city of Forest Lake. This item is actually on the EDA's work plan in 2 different locations. It's both found in goal number 2, and goal number 5. And goal number 5, that's the goal that refines kind of policy development, the whole package of policies that we have for economic development within the city. This piece falls under that. So this is that first step in that policy review for the entire EDA. Sort of what are all the tools in the toolbox? This is one of those, and this is the first review of that. On the plan for this evening's discussion, I'll give a quick history of how we kind of got this program developed, how it's been used in the past, and then I'll go over just the options that I sort of brought forward in the staff memo that's included in your packet. At any time during that discussion, feel free, if something kind of trips in your mind, you have an idea, a thought about it, feel free to bring that forward. I think this is more of an open discussion in terms of what does the EDA want to see in a downtown incentive or a redevelopment incentive program here within the city. And then after that as well, there will be a little bit of time too, if you want to hold if you feel more comfortable holding sort of your own thoughts till the end, there'll be an opportunity at the end as well. So feel free to pepper your thoughts in at any point during the presentation. But I do want to kind of start out with a brief history of the program. This program was established back in 2015. So right now it's going on almost 6 years old. I believe it was done in the fall of 15. So this fall, it'll be a 6-year-old program. The current approved program features, it's primarily focused on downtown and the Highway 61 corridor. So when you look at the program from a design perspective, that's really the target area for this incentive program. It does include a one-time abatement up to $5,000 per applicant or per property. It also has reduced building permit fees and a 10-day building permit turnaround time. So historically, since it has been an approved plan, we've awarded 9 total incentives since it first came about, which translates to right around $45,000 worth of incentive that has been distributed back within the business community. The current program language caps the amount at $30,000 annually, but I think when you're going to go back through our records, historically, we've not hit that number in any given year. And in fact, we've never really even gotten close to that $30,000 cap that's there. But that language is included in the original program criteria. Just to kind of dive a little bit more on where the original incentive program outline is, or sort of the geographic area. Let me just do a quick screen share here. This is the map that's included in the packet of application material. So what you see here is this is what's envisioned in that original plan. The purple is the MU2 area and the green is the MU1, which is the traditional downtown zoning districts. Again, as you can see here, this is heavily focused on the Highway 61 corridor and the downtown proper here in Forest Lake. So again, when this program was developed, this is the primary focus, and you see that reflected here in the original map that was included with that application materials. Looking back at kind of why the need for the revision, I think when you look back at the program language is pretty vague, in my opinion, when we look at it. I mean, I did include the entire policy in the packet, and it's about 1.5 pages. And most of that's white space. So it's a fairly open-ended policy. I feel there needs to be a little bit of clarifying language added to it. I don't think we need to rewrite the Constitution or create a super long, 50-page policy document here, but adding a little bit of clarifying language, I think would be helpful. It also is an opportunity for us to incorporate the feedback that we've received from the business community over the past 6 years. There has been a few comments that I've heard, which I'll touch on here in a moment, just about how the program was designed, some places where it missed, some places where it's been, pretty effective. And I think overall, a revision will provide a clear path for staff to follow and also give a better understanding within the business community for how this program is to be utilized. With that, I think I'll just start going through, some of those initial areas that are outlined in the memo, and then at the end of each one, kind of open it up for conversation. So the first item that I looked at and kind of identified as an area for possible review is the possibility of expanding the program's footprint. As I just showed, the existing footprint is pretty much isolated to downtown and the Highway 61 corridor. I think it's a fair starting question to ask: is the EDA satisfied with that current footprint, or would you like to see a larger footprint preferred? And if so, what does that larger footprint look like? So I think with that, I'll turn it back over to the EDA to sort of at least start to kick off the conversation as it pertains to the program's footprint.
Thank you, Dan. Do you mind displaying your screen with the current footprint?
Yep. You'd think by now I would get screen shares down cold, and there we go. So this is the existing footprint of the program.
In green, right?
Green and purple.
And purple.
Green and purple.
Okay.
Correct. Yep.
How far south and north does that go? Are we seeing the whole thing, or?
Yeah, this is the whole thing. So it looks like it goes down to just south of 5th Avenue Southwest on the south and to 7th Avenue Northwest on the north. So basically from Enterprise Rent-A-Car to Roberts Funeral Home is sort of there's a couple of anchor points there in terms of north and south where the program is.
Can you provide color as to how these location areas were initially determined?
The only thing that I can, I wasn't directly involved in the original setup of this program. I think these areas were determined because they wanted to try to focus it in the downtown area at the point. They wanted to really kind of highlight the downtown area. And I think when they kind of went through, or when it was determined, this sort of at that point fit that intent for the downtown area. So that's what I'm assuming happened with sort of this, how you got to this map that's in front of you today.
Okay.
Dan, is there also some history there's been some discussion around Highway 61 design and, kind of that Highway 61 corridor, and that's been just the 61 corridors had more of a focus than if you were to expand east to west along Broadway. I think I'm not exactly sure of how all of those dots are connected, but I think that may have provided some base original foundation.
Correct. And I think if you look at the overall, I'm just going to pull up the current zoning map here, which gives a little bit of a broader perspective as the whole area here. Does this show up okay on everybody's screen, or is this pretty tough to see?
Well, that's good.
It looks good. It takes a second to absorb it all.
Yeah, it's a lot of colors
on.
that are. So you can see here the MU2, which is this yellow and red area. This does extend quite a ways down 61 from what's included in the original program design. And there's a little bit additionally here to the north as well. So, I mean, within current zoning, or the way the current zoning or program criteria is, you could expand it out to include all of the MU2 and MU1 areas, and you would be able to capture a lot more of that 61 business corridor as well as a result of that. There had been a conversation a few years back as well about expanding it along Broadway as well, trying to pull in some of those businesses in there as a potential, redevelopment, to incentivize some redevelopment along the Broadway corridor as well, to try to connect, the downtown area with the commercial business district right along I-35 there as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I mean, we've got some open lots. We have some opportunities for, some refreshment of exterior, in some of those buildings along Broadway that, if this was available for those businesses, maybe they would be taking a harder look at that.
I'm still not sure how to bust into these conversations, but here we go.
Just go.
I have no trouble seeing a need beyond the geographic limits we put to it right now that's comparable to what we're doing right now. It pretty much comes down to looking at it and saying how much we would expect. You got a $30,000 cap per year, if I'm understanding that correctly. And with $30,000 cap per year at $5,000 per, that's 6 various projects we could deal with. We're not doing that now. It's more like 3 to 4 projects at best, isn't it?
It's more like actually 1 to 2 historically. It's more like 1 to 2 with a couple of years we have 0 in there. So 1 to 2 is more of an accurate.
because Broadway has a lot of opportunity for, well, pretty much redevelopment in small sites that will be combined at some point in time. I can certainly see things happening south and north on 61. So I'm not troubled by expanding the territory. I'd like to make sure we define it pretty cleanly so we don't have a lot of edge people that were feeling like they've been left out. So Broadway seems to be the artery and 61 seems to be the artery without digging too deep into neighborhoods or anything else, but maybe fronting property. And then I guess if you attended Broadway, I bet you'd find at least 2 more per year. I think things are going to change here in the near future in terms of how many changes we will see in the physical structure of things. So I don't think we'll have trouble doing 4 or 5 per year. So I don't think the cap is threatened by much if we can hold that cap. And I think the geographic expansion would probably be good, but I tend to push it along Broadway and frontage properties. And 61, you could edge a little bit further south, possibly, and find some real need there. And maybe north. I'm not, it's hard to judge those edges. But I'm in favor of looking at an expanded footprint.
To expand on Member Fitterman's points, I agree with your points, Mark. It seems to me that the planned updated zoning along Broadway is not just Broadway, but is it also 1 or 2 blocks on either side of Broadway?
Yes,
And I don't think that zoning has been changed yet, but I wonder if we put something in to align with more of the zoning district than the actual geography, just so that when that zoning gets updated in the year to come, that is naturally brought in. Because I think for the same reason, it's that same, business core that is expected to be at some point, not just literally 61 and literally Broadway, but the couple of blocks on either side as well.
Going with the frontage property is just one way to limit how far you take this case.
Correct.
So I don't really have an argument for going a little deeper. The deeper is just a couple blocks at best most of the time there.
Right.
And if you do deal with those internal sites, you are likely dealing with the frontage property as well. So those are just thoughts.
And to that expansion point along Broadway, there is a Broadway business district that so if it does change in the future, as President Bain alluded to, you could capture that additional depth into the neighborhoods as well by just including in the Broadway business district in the new policy revision. So it would allow for that future expansion to happen without having to go back to the policy and make a map change at that point. It would just naturally occur.
Would we have a boundary of the freeway then, assuming that everything west of the freeway is newer? They're newer buildings and not in need?
I'll try to zoom in and show this on the map because this actually there's a zoning district between Broadway and the freeway, which is, I'm just gonna get the definition here, highway business district, the B2 districts. So there's a natural barricade or barrier to the freeway. And of course, my map's not showing up very well here. Just bear with me for 1 second here. Grab a screen share. So this is going to be a little bit tough to see here, but you can kind of see where the mouse is. This kind of darker maroon and this lighter red, this brighter red. This is the Broadway business district, that's the lighter red, and then the B2 is the darker red. And here's 35. So you do sort of have this natural stop where it does sort of hit that, kind of by where the more big box retails are located here within the city. So you do sort of have a zoning district boundary there that if you brought Broadway in, there is a natural stop to where that Broadway business district does stop and it goes into B2.
Would that be down by the car wash or east of that?
I'd be east of that because here's 12th Street here. So you're looking at, it's right behind like where I believe, and again, I apologize for the map quality here. This is with the labels on it, it sort of overlays a little bit here. Just trying to.
Well, it looks like that the B2 district goes all the way down past Norman Quack's.
Correct.
but it would, like Farmers Insurance, I think that's on the corner right there where your cursor's at.
Yeah,
Or
and I
American-
can
maybe it's
get the
American.
define, I mean, I could look it up and figure out exactly what parcels are there and bring those back, at a future meeting, but it does look like it does kind of travel a little bit on the south side of Broadway there as you get closer to 35.
Mhm.
Well, I think it's a great idea to open up Broadway to it because there are a lot of smaller businesses there that could use a fresh, a facelift.
You feel like if you stop at the frontage, well, excuse me, not the frontage pieces, but the light red versus the dark red, you at least have a defined territory. If you start to penetrate the dark red, do you have to take it all in? Or can we be loose about it?
If you started going into the dark red, you'd have to, if you wanted to say carve out for a larger box retail, you'd have to put some policy language in there stating that, trying to solidify the intent on the policy side, because you would probably group in most of what's in that B2 area if you start to include the B2 business district that's in there.
There's a few sites along Broadway, the undeveloped site by Roberts and I forget his name, but anyway, there's an ownership there with the vacant site that used to be the metal strip center. That's beyond the light red, is it not? By just a bit. That's up where the strip, these are all the old names. Well, it's not as far as TCF. TCF's way up there yet, but it's back a little ways, just 2 sites worth, I think, or 1 site worth. Anyway, does our light red extend to that point on the south side of the road?
I'd have to pull up on the actual the city's GIS to confirm that. But I'd have to take a look. I can't determine from this map. I'll log in to see if I can't find it on our GIS map.
Well, I have a tendency to stay away from the highway, zoning district and contain it, because there's probably still property on the north end of 61 and the south end of 61 that we could consider as well.
Mm-hmm. Agree. And Dan, if there's nothing that would prohibit us from making a policy decision that if we were to open it up too broadly and we have the fortunate problem of being inundated with applications, we could turn around and update or provide an updated map if that were to become problematic, right? We could.
Yeah, no, yeah, you could kind of go through and kind of fine tune that a little bit, as we get, through that. And what I can do, if there's interest in expanding along Broadway, I'll get a better map than this sort of overview zoning map and bring it in so we can really get those edges defined. Easiest, from a policy standpoint is just to do all the Broadway business district to start with and see what the response is there. And then if you kind of want to get into the highway business, the larger red, we can take a look at how to scalpel our way in there a little bit as well if we need to. But I'll bring a more detailed map to a future meeting as we sort of really kind of dive in on that particular update.
Could we look at the southern edge on 61 beyond the Roberts Funeral Home edge? I just wanted to get a quick sense of what we have immediately there.
Let me do a screen share here again. So here is, oh man. So here's the map. Here's the current boundaries right around I think it's up in, down about here.
Mm-hmm.
So you have quite a ways all the way down here that would be included if we did expand it down along the south side of 61 there.
The crosshatch designation is what? With the red crosshatch over the yellow?
That's the MU2. That's the mixed use business. That's a portion of that's already included in the plan. It just has a southern border there at, the southern border hits it right here, right at Roberts Funeral Home at 5th Avenue. And this new one, if you expand it, you could bring that further down on 61 as well if there's desire to.
Well, we're going to stick with the zoning outlines. That's a pretty long, dramatic expansion then on the south side.
Mhm.
You could call it quits at 11. There are certainly things to be done within that zone.
I might even be open to something even as further down, that even closer to 97. And I mean, our goal is to encourage redevelopment, and there's certainly a large number of seemingly eligible sites, and it's hard to know which of those is going to sequence next. And I'd hate for us to draw an arbitrary boundary and miss an opportunity.
I agree with that. We have the cap to control the amount we do
Yeah,
spend, and we
we
can
do.
bust past that, I suppose we want as well. But one of the better monies that the EDA ever spends is on this kind of enhancement.
I agree. And if this is part of a tipping point that helps to spur a project forward, I'd like to see it. And if it meant that we were inundated and we had to go back and, reconsider, then we certainly could. So I'd rather us have a more robust map than a limited map.
I'm with you.
I would agree.
One final question on the map. I know this had come up when I was looking at these areas in general. Let me do one last screen share here. There is a couple of small, if you can see these little kind of violet, light purple, lavender colored areas, these are neighborhood commercial sites. So there are commercial businesses located in there. They're relatively small. There's only a handful of them, but they do have businesses located in there. Any desire to add these other smaller areas as well into that larger expanded footprint, or leave those off?
I don't find a reason to deny them, given what we've just talked about in terms of trying to really get involved and really get a distribution of funds. I can see the strip center across from the high school renovating or modifying at some point. I don't know if that's new. And the corner site that's up there is the C-store that's up there, is it not?
Yep.
Correct.
Yeah. So those things are fairly well established and probably not going to have much change, but $5,000 doesn't go far in terms of outside exterior upgrade. I'm not against including them.
I would agree. I guess my only pause is, are there other, by having just Dan, would you have just those two pockets, or would you open it up to that 97 corridor? Because if we're just having those two pockets, are we missing, I'm just thinking, are we excluding items that we shouldn't?
In looking at it, there's a handful of neighborhood commercial. I think there's another one just down on, I don't have my screen share going. Sorry about that. It looks like there's another area down here on 61, just kind of across from the airport, but I think that one's got won't have a redevelopment because of the airport overlay district that's on there. That's not going to have any impact there. There may just be a handful of the other small neighborhood commercial ones. But I think by adding those two, you are sort of grouping in, just a smaller geographic area, but you are capturing a little bit larger of that small business area within the city.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd be going on the west side also, like where Ruddy Rentals is?
Correct. If you expanded MU2 all the way down, you would grab all of that where Ruddy's Rental is, the carburetor shop, et cetera. And then if you added neighborhood commercial, you'd pick up the commercial area right across from the high school, as well as the gas station on the corner there on 97. So you're grabbing quite a bit more geographic area by doing that expansion.
I think it makes a lot of sense. We want private enterprise to continue investing in their businesses and in, you know, Forest Lake. And so if we can encourage that by being more inclusive of these different areas, I think that's, everybody wins.
I would agree.
Yeah, I don't think it's an issue expanding it myself, you know, especially, you know, there's plenty of caveats that go with it in order to get that money. There's certain requirements so along the way. So I don't know if we're going to be a big rush. Anyways, kind of history's kind of proven that. So my 2 cents worth. I don't think it'd be a problem expanding it. What I'm trying to say.
Agree.
Any kind of last questions on the footprint? What I'll do is I'll bring back and expand it. I'll do the MU2, the Broadway to start, and then the neighborhood commercial and show what that map looks like. I'll bring a better map next time, so it's not the overall zoning map, so we can get a little bit more detail on there and really kind of drill in and look at that with a little bit better detail than what was presented tonight.
If we expand the map, how do we get the word out to those businesses that could be affected by it?
We will do, so if we get this, when we do the policy revision, we have the new plan, we will back that up with an additional outreach. You know, we have not done an active promotion of this for a while, so we will kind of revamp a communications plan and make sure that we get this sort of a fresh round of communications out to not only the existing areas, but also the new areas as well, to make sure that we're hitting as many of those new businesses as possible.
Okay.
Great question, Jenny.
Is it okay if I move on to the second item that's on there? The second item is probably one where I've got the most feedback from local businesses on. This is the qualifications for the program. I have heard from businesses that the entry point of $40,000 may be a little bit too steep. Like a lot of their exterior improvement projects may not hit that point. And they're wondering, is there a way that we could offer a, you know, sort of a graduated or a step program where if they did a smaller improvement project, would they qualify for less of an incentive? So, you know, for example, if they did a $20,000 improvement, could they get a $2,500 incentive versus a $5,000 incentive? There has been, you know, a few improvement projects that have happened that, you know, weren't close to that. So they kind of hear what that limit is. They sort of walk away. But there has been requests, you know, from businesses to say, can we adjust that qualification, that entry point, bring it down lower to try to capture some of those smaller projects? If you do adjust the qualifications down, you do also run the risk that you're not going to really get those bigger projects that are those sort of wow projects. You may get some small painting projects. You may get some small landscaping projects. They all do work to improve the aesthetics of downtown or of the area. But they're not going to be necessarily always those wow projects. So they're looking for feedback on, is the EDA open to sort of adjusting those qualifications to do more of a step program to kind of capture some of those smaller projects in a revised policy?
If we keep the budget for the same, the 30,000 a year, can we do a percentage set aside for small projects?
So are you like saying like if we did like 30,000 a year, say do 15,000 for the big ones and 15,000 for,
No, I was thinking 20,000 for the big ones, 10,000 for the little, or something like that. And if there's no little applications, use them for the big, or vice versa. If there's no big ones, use the leftovers for a smaller one.
I mean, it's possible. I just look at it just from a, you know, it's going to be a tough from an approval standpoint of, you know, because they all don't come in at one time. I mean, these things filter in throughout the entire year. So you could easily by, you know, May go through all of your entire budget for the small ones and then not get a larger project, you know, and then, you know, it's sort of, you know, my recommendation would be if you're going to adjust the qualifications, you adjust the qualifications until you hit the cap, kind of like we did with the CARES Act funding. It was, you know, you were in first and you did a $5,000 application, you get the 5,000. But if you're the last one in and there's 3,000 left for the year, you may get a reduced amount, you know, sort of a first in, first out type project or from an approval standpoint.
I was thinking about it similar to Lorge from a percentage standpoint, but maybe a little bit different spin on it. So 5,000 is like 12.5% of 40 grand. So could it be as loose as, hey, if you do a project and probably would set some sort of minimum, but you could just get reimbursed for X percent, call it 10, 15, 12 and a half, whatever number we want to choose in the policy. Probably want to have a minimum just because there's staff time to process the reimbursements. So we don't be nickel and diming this thing. But I mean, if somebody does a $5,000 project, I mean, why not kick them $500?
I'm okay with accepting smaller projects in concept. However, I'd like us to have a little bit more definition around eligible expenses, just because I'm a little concerned that although we say routine maintenance is excluded, I feel like some of those small items, you start to get the what's routine maintenance versus what's an improvement. And I feel like we're going to put staff in a tough position on making some of those determinations, and then us ultimately as a decision body. So if we could be more specific on definitions of improvement versus maintenance, I'm okay with having, and I think the pro rata approach that's been suggested is a good one, but I think we want to make sure that we're not just fixing front doors, but that we are actually, substantially making improvements from what's there, same state. Some of these eligible properties have some pretty significant deferred maintenance, and I just want to make sure that we are in the improvements of aesthetic and not just helping on backlog of deferred maintenance.
That's a hard one to define, isn't it?
It is a hard one.
So the one hand of thought that crossed my mind was that could it be associated with pulling permits? However, I don't suppose anybody needs to pull a permit to put a fresh coat of paint on a building that's badly needed, which might be a good use of funds.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Dan, I wonder if there's some other programs that you might be able to borrow language from on helping to better define maintenance versus improvement.
Yeah, I can definitely do some more research on that to try to get that, like you said, better defined. One thing that, I had to thought of as I was kind of looking at the adjusting the qualifications was current language states you get one application per property. So you get, and it's a $5,000, for the property. If we adjust those qualifications, either prorated or on a sliding scale, staff would still recommend doing a single application per property. So if you do a reduced property and so you get a $1,500 abatement or incentive, you can't come back in a subsequent year with another project, up to that $5,000 cap. Just from a ongoing, administrative standpoint, it's you want to make sure it's a lot more tracking so you don't hit that cap versus, if we know this address is already applied, they already got their, program. The business owner can then sort of determine, am I going to apply for a single smaller application, or do I want to kind of bunch my projects together and apply for a larger incentive program? But that'd be one recommendation that we add in there, is just a single application per property that still be kept in whatever revision happens.
Is there a time limit on that? I mean, what if a property changes ownership?
Current policy is silent on that. And again,
that should probably be addressed.
And that was another thing I was thinking about as I was kind of going through this, is that current policy is silent on, is it per owner or per property? I look at the language as saying that it's per property. So if the first owner does anything to it and they get the incentive, that's what it is. But you could also make it, if the property does change hands, fresh ownership, and they make the investment, could requalify them for, the incentive program again.
Yeah, I think it's yeah. On the one hand, you'd like to think everybody's above board, but maybe put a
Getting
time frame on
messier.
it.
It's getting messier as we go along here. So
Mm-hmm.
good luck to us all on this one. I don't mind the lower amount. Sometimes I really do worry about it being something doesn't really help redevelopment or new development or real significant improvement if we lower the thresholds. I'm still kind of hung up right about there. I'd hate denying, that about a half value if it's, If they put 40,000 in, they get 5. If they put 20,000 in, they get 25. I can't argue that one if, you know, that one comes along, and that's the consensus here.
Wasn't it, and maybe this is jumping the gun, but wasn't the other qualification had to be exterior work versus interior, and that caused some heartache for some owners?
Yeah, it's all exterior, I believe.
Correct. Yeah, it has to be exterior. It has to be viewable from the street, you know, and some of the properties on 61, you have the rear entrances as well from the parking lot. So you can do either front or back, but it has to be viewable. It can't be, you can't replace the HVAC system on the inside of the building using this fund. It's got to be an external improvement.
Gotcha.
And Dan, that's more aligned with just governance over using public funds, right? Is that it's got to be a publicly visible amenity rather than something that's either on the inside or assisting with operations.
That is correct. Yep.
But Leif, you're correct. That has been, there's certainly an identified use beyond, you know, if that type of a program were available, there's certainly a demand for it.
And I think we'd be enthusiastic about somebody that would invest $20,000 into upgrades for an exterior, and that would be a valid thing rather than having to go all the way to $40,000. So I'm amenable to, you know, allowing that half grade element, you know, 50%.
Pro rata.
What I'm kind of gathering here is that it sounds like the EDA may be agreeable to starting the conversation of adjusting those qualifications with some additional criteria surrounding what activities qualify for the program, and maybe bringing that back as a topic to say, here's what the adjusted qualifications look like, and here's what approved improvements are, you know, to help kind of shore that language up and bring that back as a starting point to look at adjusting qualifications for the program.
Mm-hmm.
Agree.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yep.
The next one that, you know, staff identified is the current language that's in the program has a 10-day turnaround time for permits. Want to start this conversation out by saying that staff remains committed to providing expedited permitting for all building permits associated with the program. What we've found in the last 6 years is that this 10-day turnaround time has caused some confusion. Case in point is there's always been some confusion from an applicant's perspective as to when they may assume that's a complete application, and then staff's perspective as to when does that clock actually start. So, you know, say you submit a building permit and a set of plans, but once the building looks at the plans and they realize that the plans are missing a big piece of the engineering associated with it. So they have to reach back out to the applicant to get that information, you know, from their architect, and that can take some time. You know, are we up against the shot clock at that point? You know, so you have the applicant who assumes that they've completed a full city application by submitting the paperwork that's completed, but it's missing some detail. There's just been some kind of disagreements between building and applicants just in terms of what that 10-day window looks like. It's also, it kind of muddies the water, and it kind of becomes one of those things where we're trying to expedite permits here, but if we're, you know, at day 11 due to a delay that's caused by the applicant, you know, city staff doesn't look good because now we're outside of that 10-day window. Staff would recommend in the revision of this policy is to remove that sort of arbitrary shot clock of a 10-day turnaround time for permits and just remain committed to doing expedited permitting for downtown processes. Historically, it's been a first in, first out with our building permits. And these ones, if we do expedited, would then sort of jump to the front of the line, you know, based on if they're applying using the downtown incentive, but we would not be sort of under this arbitrary 10-day turnaround time for the permitting. If it's a simple permit, we will get those turned around very quickly, but that 10-day turnaround has provided a little bit of issues as we've administered this program over the past 6 years. So just looking for some feedback on that particular aspect of the process.
The staff's recommendation that the word expedited covers the game.
Correct. Yeah, it's the 10-day turnaround has been just, it's in essence, it's sort of an arbitrary 10-day turnaround. And then if you really dive into the weeds on it, does it include holidays? Does it include weekends? Does it include, who makes the decision when it's complete? What happens if we're waiting for 4 days for the architect to get back to us? Does that count against the window? Versus if we have expedited in there, we can say, we'll get this out as quickly as possible. And we do have we will jump you to the front of the line, which I think was the intent of having that, having that language in the original policy.
It's hard to account for all the factors, so expedited might be the best route to take.
Agree.
I would agree, and goal of this is to have solid relationships between staff and our project, or our business partners, and that building permitting process can take multiple rounds before we've got a complete application, and that can create confusion. So I agree. I like the expedited language. I think it sends a good message, but holding to exact deadline on some of those more complicated applications I can see has been problematic. So I'm okay taking the 10 days out.
I am as well.
I do have a little bit of there's a taxpayer on the other side that's also paying taxes and also has a permit that really they also would like to see moved through. And so, it's a little bit of a double bonus that we're providing to businesses by the expedited permitting. And so I appreciate the goal of it should be fast. I guess I would look to just more of the minimum service we're providing to everybody, because those homeowners that are having, deck applications or whatever, some of those smaller things that are in pipeline are also important. So we're giving a financial incentive, and also here, stacking somebody against a residence project, which I don't love that idea, but I do see it as a benefit.
Well, the EDA is all about business, so.
Absolutely.
Any other kind of final thoughts on that particular item?
Not for me.
One of the last things I identified in the current policy is that the current policy has staff doing the approvals of all these applications. And even though that's been in the policy, historically, past practice has been all of these have come before the EDA. When I was looking at the past applications, I think every single one that has been approved formally by the EDA. And we'd be looking at just sort of memorializing that past practice status and making the EDA, staff still gets the applications. We do the review, we make the recommendation to either approve or deny the application, but that approval or denial does happen at the EDA. If the applicant is in disagreement with the EDA's decision, the appeal then would go to council for appeal. So it's just a slight change in how these are approved, although it does track with past practice on that one. So it's a little bit of a housekeeping item for that one in a revision.
What was the slight change, Dan? I mean, I understand staff recommending through the EDA, and the EDA always having some awareness of where this money is going and approval process. Where was the change?
So the change right now is, if you actually review the existing language, is that the current policy allows staff to be the ones that makes the approval process. So technically the EDA does not need to be involved in any of this process, but historically it's sort of, we've always brought these to the EDA for approval. This just formalizes how we've been handling these approvals. So it takes it out of the staff realm and puts it back in the EDA's realm from a policy perspective.
I suppose that makes timing a little bit more complicated, but still lets the EDA have the pulse of what's going on in terms of these monies.
And that's incorrect. And that's been, when we've gone through, and like I said, past practice has been all of these, I believe, have come before the EDA for final approval. So it's just more memorializing how we've been handling these, and it just makes it more formal in the policy of how, and lets the applicant know what the approval process is, and there's no confusion as to who's the approving body for these incentive programs.
It does extend the timeline, doesn't it then? After permitting, it's got to come before the EDA?
So typically when these have come through, these are post-project. So these aren't, the building permit, or the incentive on the building permit side happens on the front end of the project, and those can, that would still be recommended to go, at a staff level. It's the overall, if there's an incentive, if there's a $5,000 incentive, that would come into the EDA for approval. Those have all been done after the project's been completed. So that timeline is not, it slows it down a little bit by having to align it with an EDA meeting. However, the projects are pretty much already completed at that point. So there's not the pressure of making sure the project's completed, because we also, from a staff side, have to verify the accounting to make sure that the work was actually completed. So we have to verify that, yes, the improvements that you're wanting reimbursement for were completed, that you actually have spent the money on those improvements. So those are all typically done after the project has been completed.
That makes a lot of sense, Dan. What about, I mean, is it staff's recommendation just to bring forward the ones that meet the policy requirements for approval, or is it to bring forward everything? It would be on EDA to deny ones that may be outside the final policy. Like if we set it, 2,500 for 20,000 and somebody spends 19. I mean, where are we going to land on that?
I mean, I think, if you want to align with past practice, everything on the incentive side. So if there's an incentive that's out, if they just want like an expedited permit or reduced permit fees, that can be handled at the staff level. If they're actually looking for an incentive, either full incentive, or if the new language allows for a graduated, a scaled back version of it, those would come to the EDA. So any tax dollars that get pushed back into the, handed back to the, applicant, those would go through the EDA. But from a permitting standpoint, that could be, the front end work could be handled internally. The incentive work would go through the EDA for approval.
Thanks.
I'm
Any
good
other
with the way it is.
Yeah. Any other feedback for Dan? All right, Dan, anything further for EDA consideration on this topic?
No, I have quite a bit. I'll start looking at getting some policy, making these suggestions tonight. I'll incorporate those in another draft policy, and we'll bring those back at a future meeting so we can start to go through what the revised policy looks like, and, have some, there's going to be a couple of additional conversations that I needed just to kind of clarify some of those points that were brought up tonight, but I'll memorialize what was said tonight, put those in a policy, and bring those back to EDA at a future meeting.
Perfect. Thank you. Members of the EDA, next item on our agenda for discussion and consideration is the new track circulator bus loop. Dan, do you want to just do an update on that?
Yep, I just have a quick update for the EDA and the new tracks. For those of you, just so everybody's aware, new tracks is a circulator bus here within the city. It's been in place, I believe, since 2018. When COVID hit in 2020, we did stop services. They did stop serving Forest Lake. They kind of paused all of their circulator bus services. They reached out and they're looking to ask if we want to resume services. In conversation with them, we're looking at possibly a June restart of resumption of services. The loop is out here on Wednesday. It's 1 day a week. It's from approximately 9:45 in the morning till 1 p.m. I do have a copy of the route map that I can share quickly, just so everybody's familiar with where they are operating here within the city. I'll pull this up here quick. As you can see, here is the map that they do. They do a kind of a blend of, they stop at senior facilities and they stop at different retail and restaurant locations throughout the city. This is the route. So there's no appointment needed. They basically, seniors can get on this route and ride the bus, stop at, say, Walmart or Keys Cafe or downtown Forest Lake. And then a bus can come back and pick them up 20 minutes or approximately 30 minutes later. The bus returns, they get back on and then get dropped back off where they got picked up from. The EDA is currently budgeted for this for 2021. We did keep this into the budget for 21. So if they resume services, we do have the funds available to pay for this new resumption in services. I know historically, there's always been sort of this conversation point, is the EDA the best budget item to have a circulator bus that serves the senior community in? We are looking at for future years, so for 2022 and forward, of getting it out of the EDA's budget and potentially putting it in with the senior center's budget. The senior center operation is now being managed by the city, so we potentially are going to take this new tracks item and place it over into the senior center budget. But they are wanting to resume services here in June. But one of the main reasons I also wanted to bring this up to the EDA was kind of pre-COVID, there were some initial conversations that were happening between the city and the county about possibly leveraging our investment that we were making within the New Tracks program with some grant dollars that potentially were available from the Met Council or some county funding to do an expanded service to allow for either additional days, a different, larger footprint, larger loops. It sounds like those conversations, well, once COVID hit, those conversations pretty much stopped. And we are kind of restarting those conversation points. And in speaking with a New Tracks operator last week, one of the possible conversation points is, if this service were to be expanded, there's the possibility of allowing it to expand into Chisago County, which would allow then the connection from Forest Lake to the Wyoming hospital. There's been a lot of demand for appointment services from Forest Lake to get to Wyoming, but since it crosses county lines, it's pretty tough for the city to take the lead on that, cross-jurisdictional, cross-county, adding that one stop in. But there has been some conversation at the county level about adding in some stops in Chisago County, and along that lines, as well as bringing residents or membership from Chisago County into Forest Lake to do shopping. So from the EDA's perspective, this is a possibility. We may be able to leverage our current routes and ridership to bring in outside residents into Forest Lake to do their shopping and eat at our restaurants. So it's still very, very early on in the infancy in terms of what that looks like. But I just wanted to have the EDA have some awareness that there is some possibility or some early conversations happening about expanding this service out in future years, which could, at that point, bring shoppers into the city of Forest Lake for, so they can shop at our stores and eat at our restaurants. So New Track services looking to resume in June, and possible expansion in future years. But a lot of that's to be determined, and I'll provide updates back to the EDA if I do have any updates as to what that expansion would potentially look like. But wanted just the EDA to be aware that you may start seeing the New Tracks buses here in Forest Lake again, starting in June.
I know there's been a large interruption in all of this, but is there a sense of the enthusiasm for the ridership?
In talking to Scott from New Tracks, he has actually been fielding calls from the existing stops. So the senior facilities where they're currently stopping, they are reaching out to him asking when the services are going to resume. So there has been some feelers put back to New Tracks. I don't know if that's going to result in a spike in ridership. I don't know what those numbers are going to look like. Also, from a timing perspective, the senior center just reopened today for the first sort of soft opening. So from bringing the services back online, this is a great one to add in, because that was one of the stops on Wednesday, was the senior center. And I know a lot of seniors did use this service to get to the senior center for the programming that was there on Wednesdays.
It was approximately 16,000, wasn't it, from the EDA?
Yeah, roughly. It was right around $1,100 a month. Some of that varied just based on the number of fares they collected. There wasn't a formal fee that was charged to ridership, but they could donate what they felt. So there was a little bit of variance in what it was, but approximately 16,000 a year for the program.
I look forward to it shifting to the senior and marriage between counties, and I look forward to that shift. I'm not so sure that it's an EDA fundamental. So, but meanwhile, I guess you keep it rolling as best you can. Otherwise, you're going to lose all your momentum.
Yeah, I would agree. Dan, when we talked about this this week as part of setting the agenda, I think you mentioned that, so those budget dollars are reserved for 2021, but something that we would consider shifting into 2020 at the 2022 budget mark is kind of get it out of the EDA and get it into a more appropriate city budget.
Correct. Yeah, that is the vision at this point, is to get it sort of out of, it's always been sort of shoehorned into the EDA. I mean, there's a benefit there because it does benefit businesses by having the stops at businesses, but it is a better fit from a senior center budget perspective to have that ridership be the one that is coming out of that budget item.
I'm happy to support the program overall, and I think it certainly provides value to pockets of our community that have transportation need. I just don't see it as being a big economic generator. If nothing else, it's more of a substitute. Many of those riders perhaps would have spent some of those dollars in a different way. It's more of a convenience, and we're providing the means. So yeah, I think getting it into the right budget is important, and but happy to see that the service is resuming here. One more step towards shifting to normalcy. Any other comments for Dan on the new Trex program? All right, our next item this evening, other city updates. Dan or Patrick, anything for the EDA to consider tonight?
I have just a couple of updates. Arts in the Park update. The Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission is going to meet next week to look at what Arts in the Park looks like for 2021 based on the new regulations that Governor Walz released last week. So there will be an Arts in the Park back at Lakeside Memorial Park, and they're going to finalize what that looks like at their meeting next week. On the sculpture side, the footing has been poured and is in place. Talked to the artist last week. It looks like that sculpture should be installed, I believe, next week. Sometime it'll be installed. I know the beautification group had reached out and wanted to do some type of unveiling or dedication ceremony, but nothing's been finalized at this point. So if one does develop, I will let the EDA know what that looks like. But the sculpture is on track to be installed, I believe, sometime next week. I did reach out to Donovan and ask him for sort of an overall, update on development projects here within the city. He did provide one to me. The Forest Hills Farm project it will be going before the Planning Commission and City Council this month in May. So look for that project to come forward. It's going to be a 35 lot development project. There's been some work or expansion at the local Jeep and Buick GMC dealerships. So there's been some expansion work at those dealerships this year. North Lakes Academy recently received zoning approval to increase their enrollment faculty counts at both their K through 8 and upper school campuses. So some expansions happening at North Lakes Academy. And Common Bond Communities received zoning review to build a 53 unit apartment building south of the Forest Lake Transit Center. So there's going to be a new apartment or multifamily unit going in south of the transit center. And the final update I have is just a reminder that the next EDA meeting on the 24th will be the downtown kickoff planning meeting at 5:30 p.m. So make sure that's on your calendars. Full details will follow as soon as I have them back from HKGI.
To that note, council has on their agenda this evening a provision to potentially return to in-person meetings, and timing of that and what does that look like is kind of all part of council's consideration tonight. So we've heard your feedback about preference of being in person. A note that if we do indeed go in person, that does mean that the option for remote attendance stops for EDA and council members or any commission and council members. We will have to be in person. Staff and members of the public can continue to participate remotely, but we will all then shift in person if that's the decision that's made. So we've heard your feedback and that preference, and that's on council's agenda this evening. If we make that decision, I think the thought is that kickoff meeting potentially could be in person. And just working through what are the right safety parameters that we need to have in place given the updated governor's orders. So stay tuned.
Regarding our planning consultants,
Yes.
I can put that in. Are they somewhat along the way on their orientation such that we can start establishing these more intimate small group meetings? I have a series of businesses, landowners, and others that I'd like to involve because I think they're the most important programmers to this entire project downtown. And I would truly like to see them have their their comfortable moment to dialogue with the planners and let them know what they think. And so where do we stand, and what help me understand how I might initiate those meetings? Because the people I'm talking about are a diverse group, and their hours are really mixed up. And it's a matter of trying to figure out if there's set days the planners will come in for a set period of time. I try and package these meetings so there's at least 2 or 3 in a row. And so that's my goal. I want to start these meetings as soon as someone tells me you feel like the planners got their feet on the ground and they understand what's going on here to some degree. Sometimes these programming sessions are more important to happen earlier rather than later, because it drives the orientation for the planners as well. So let me know how I can start this.
At this point, Commissioner Finneman, I'd recommend just waiting until that kickoff meeting. I have had that conversation with Bruce, sort of how do you interface, your groups with the planner. So he is aware that you do have the connections and want to bring those groups in. Initial conversations made it sound like it's going to be done via like sort of a blocked time. Like he'll do an afternoon or multiple afternoons within a week up here. So everything sort of happens within that time that he's up here. But I would wait until that kickoff meeting. And at that point, he'll have a better idea, a better explanation in terms of how to approach that moving forward. Right now, they're still doing a lot of their backgrounding, information, kind of pulling together some initial thoughts on it. And they'll have a much better picture for what that process looks like, what that interview looks like during the kickoff meeting on the 24th.
Okay, I'll wait.
Patrick, Dan, anything further for city update? I will mention this as a at risk of being a big can of worms. Some of you may have heard that City Council had a recent workshop conversation, and topic of discussion was various sources of funding for the 10-year plan. And we had a specific workshop session to talk about what might a sales tax look like for Forest Lake. I bring that up to you just so that you are aware that that conversation took place. If you are interested in learning more about that conversation, the agenda that is in the last council workshop packet, actually, I'm sorry, it's the last council meeting, has the provisions that staff laid out of what that might look like to consider. I would say at this point, it is one of the funding options that are being considered as part of the overall 10-year plan. However, sources of those funds, specific projects for those funds is still under development and consideration. And I just never want you to be surprised by something that you hear on what is this that's been being considered. If we were to head down that path, there is a very long, robust process that we must consider, specifically identifying specific projects and ultimately bringing it to voter referendum to pass such a consideration. It also requires some state legislative approval. So this would not be something that would happen quickly if we were to continue to pursue it. But again, I mention it to you because it was an agenda item on a recent council meeting and has had a little bit of press, a little bit of coverage, and just wanted to give you a heads up. So if we were to further consider utilization of such a revenue source, obviously discussions with our business groups would be important. Feedback from groups such as the EDA would be important. And at this point, I would say all of that is a little bit premature in that council's just trying to get our arms around what does this 10-year plan look like and what are reasonable available sources of revenue that we might want to consider to fund those projects. So happy to have further discussion if you would like at a later point, but just wanted to bring it up as it was a recent agenda item. With that, let's transition over to a Washington County update. And Chris Eng, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, President Bain and members. Good evening. I don't have a formal report for you or updates for you tonight. However, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Chris? Chris, I know that the recent round of stimulus funding and federal funding to both counties and municipalities that information is still being digested. I know the league is reviewing some more recent guidance that just came out, and there's an upcoming webinar to help inform cities. I'm assuming the same thing is happening on the county side. Is the kind of the message at this point, hold and see, or are you happen to be any further along than we are from the city perspective?
Thank you, President Bain. It's a very good question. And I just saw that late this afternoon, there was an email that came out from the National Association of Counties that said the U.S. Treasuries is releasing some of the guidance today.
Yeah,
So
right.
very timely, but I do anticipate that there will be upcoming county board workshops, and we'll have the opportunity to discuss how to utilize those dollars. But it's a pretty significant number here in Washington County.
Yeah, it is. It's also at the city level significant, and we also are looking for additional guidance. The title of that is like revised interim guidance or something that just it gives you a notion that it's by no means final guidance, but it's kind of the what's been digested so far. So I look forward to seeing what comes through.
We do as well. Thank you.
All right, we do not have Nanette from the chamber. However, I'll just give an opportunity if Member Lorge wanted to provide a chamber update, or if anybody else had anything from the chamber.
Sure. Tomorrow is our annual awards gathering. We're gathering at Stella's in person, which is going to be really exciting. And then the next big event will be the golf tournament on Monday, July 26th. And it's a lot of effort going into that. That's our biggest fundraiser for the year.
Fantastic. With that, we are at our end of our planned agenda. Go ahead, Member Finneman.
Just one question. I believe the Legion is moving ahead as if the 4th of July is a given. Is there any catch on the city side of that story?
Permitting for that is also on tonight's council agenda. And so I look forward to hearing more of what their plans are. But yes, it seems that there is, and I don't have all of their plans in front of me, but there is certainly a 4th of July celebration that is being planned by the Legion. I'll know more after tonight's council meeting. And again, the permitting for all of that is part of what's on the agenda this evening.
Okay, will the Legion be present at that meeting? Do you know? Zoom wise anyway.
I am not sure if we have, if they are planning on attending. Certainly, Karen, go ahead.
Greg Weiss, who was at all of their planning meetings, is going to be there to answer questions our council might have.
Good.
And
okay,
the Legion has submitted their applications, and that's what's on the agenda this evening. So.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else to come before us this evening? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I would move to adjourn.
I'll second it.
We have a motion from Member Feineman and a second from Member Lorge. And Karen, could we have a roll call?
Member Husnick?
Aye.
Member Finneman?
Aye.
Member Lorge?
Aye.
Member Erickson?
Aye.
And President Bain?
Aye. And we are adjourned, everybody. See you in 2 weeks for the downtown kickoff. Look forward to it. Thanks, everybody, for a good evening.